Welcome to A Better HR Business, the podcast that looks at how HR consultants and HR tech firms grow their businesses and how they help their employers to get the best out of their people. Remember, for show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Okay, let's get started.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Great to have you along. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with Kerry Barrett. Kerry is a fascinating person. She's an Emmy Award-winning journalist turned media training and PR coach expert. And she's an on-camera communication expert and speaker. And Kerry helps small business owners grow credibility and visibility by teaching them how to land media placements. So hugely important area. And Kerry, I'm so glad you've joined me to talk about these subjects today.
Well, thank you so much for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here. My voice is a little bit scratchy this morning. I'm not sure why, so I apologize.
No problem at all. Well, yeah. And you're in New Jersey, I think. Is that right? Or
Yep. Just about an hour outside of New York City, Manhattan.
Very good. Okay, great. So yeah, I follow you on LinkedIn. You write some great content, and I know you're helping so many people around the world with your on-camera virtual communication training stuff. I had some specific questions I'm hoping to get into, and then perhaps you could share some communication tips for people as well. So let me start with the tricky bit is before you even get to have a conversation with the journalist in the first place, you've got to make that connection and get them interested in you and so on. So I'm trying to work out, and this is a mouthful of a question, but how to develop relationships with journalists and or how to know which ones to follow when there are thousands of journalists and publications out there. In other words, where do you get started out of all of that? How do you get into the media and where do you start?
Such a good question, and one that's incredibly important. I want to start by saying this. It's not necessary that you know a journalist personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or that you have a long-standing relationship with them. I think that's one of the biggest sort of misnomers about media is that you have to know all the journalists. And there are PR agencies who are pitching journalists that they have never met or heard of every single day, thousands of times a day. So you don't need to know every single one. That said, getting media is getting harder and harder. It's harder now than it has been before. And that's for a number of reasons. Mostly it's because that industry has been hit with huge layoffs. And so you've got fewer people doing more things and they're being pitched perhaps hundreds of times a day. Wow. Their inbox is getting filled up. And so certainly having a few curated and intentional relationships is helpful. So the easiest place to get started with that is think about what your life experience is and what your business experience is. And yes, it should ladder back to your business, whatever it is that you're talking about, but recognize that sometimes to get a campaign started, right, to really begin to dive into it, you might have to branch slightly out of, I'm strictly talking about business or whatever it is that I want to talk about. So for example, thinking of a recent client who is a functional medicine expert, right? She pitched a story about gardening for your biome. That's not exactly what her area of expertise is, but it was a really compelling story and she knows enough to be able to talk about it. So we pitched her on that and she got picked up for TV. So think beyond the boundaries with which you normally sort of put your business in or your life expertise. The second thing that you need to be thinking about is, are you drawing from business or are you drawing from life? So are you looking at expert tips based on your industry and your area of expertise in your business? Or are you drawing on things that are more experience-based? So for example, you could be a single mom who runs a business and your business is about marketing. And so you're talking about marketing over on this side in terms of your expert tips, but maybe you're also pitching to a more broader publication about how to run a business or how to manage your time as it relates to being a working mother or a single working mother. So again, it's broadening the way in which you think about your business and your experience. That's tough to do. It sounds easy, but it's quite a bit tougher than you would think. The next step is to start searching up who is in your space that is getting media and figuring out which publications and which outlets they are. So find out the people who are in your area or in your expertise or experience, and then just start researching them and figure out what outlets and what publications are they getting picked up in. And then once you have that narrowed down, then go into those outlets and publications and find the journalists or the contributors or the editors who are writing stories about your area of expertise. Now, if you are approaching a digital publication or a print publication, you're looking at Forbes or Entrepreneur or Inc., they have editors who are focused on certain types of coverage. Underneath those editors fall three types of writers: contributors, staff writers, and freelancers. Freelancers don't work for the company. Staff writers do. Contributors have some sort of agreement that they will write a certain number of articles for this publication per month. And so figuring out which one is the right one for you. And if there is a staff writer or a freelance writer who you see popping up regularly, whose byline says covers issues faced by single moms who are running businesses, then that's who you need to pitch. On the TV side, it's a little bit easier because you're likely working within a smaller demographic, right? Your local TV stations, there's probably only a few of them and they cover a certain area. So go through the bios of the different reporters and the anchors on the station's website. Like, for example, I had a client who was opening a new yoga studio, and we went through the TV bios online and we found a reporter who mentioned that one of her hobbies was yoga. So we pitched that particular reporter this particular story and it got picked up. The next thing to do, and this is something that you should be doing throughout, is setting your Google alerts for any indication that there is a story or something trending in the news that has to do with your area of expertise or your experience. And then follow all of these journalists on Twitter, or I call it Twitter still, X. The reason is that journalists use X constantly as a way to mine for new talent and as a way to understand what's trending in the industry in terms of stories. I guarantee they're probably all on Instagram and some of them are on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook, but they're using that stuff more in a personal way. On Twitter or X, they're using it to spread information about stories, right? So retweeting, following, et cetera. So if you can follow them on Twitter and engage with some of their content there so that they recognize your name, when they see it pop up in their inbox, they're more likely to open it up, as long as the subject line is good and the pitch is relevant. That was a very long answer, but there's a lot that goes into that.
No, it's great. It's great. I'm guessing you can't just have a massive list of journalist contacts, whether they be staff writers or TV reporters or whatever it may be, because you can't realistically follow all of them and keep track of them and then retweet things and stuff. It'll just get overwhelming. So it's probably worth narrowing that down.
I would narrow it down to no more than, and this is probably, depending on where you are in your PR journey and whether you have help doing this, you have an assistant or something, I would really be looking at no more than 15. Once you're in their ecosystem, if you will, and they know who you are, now you're on their short list. And if they have a story that pops up and they know that you're compelling and you can speak on this particular topic well, then they'll probably call you rather than go through their inbox and see who may have some expertise related to this particular topic. So it's really that initial contact and that initial appearance or interview or whatever it is. And then, like I said, you're on their short list and you're in their ecosystem. Breaking through that, though, is the toughest part. Right. So you're narrow it down so that you can be very targeted in your approach.
Okay. And you mentioned setting up a Google alert. What would go into that if you're a HR business or an HR tech firm? What kind of search parameters would you have set up for that?
I would definitely put HR in there. I would put tech and any other sort of specific or niche area of expertise that you have. So certainly if you have, HR, it's a very broad topic. You're going to be getting notifications at all times, but think about how to narrow that down just a little bit more. I would put HR in there and then I would dial down just a little bit more without knowing exactly if you're referencing somebody specifically. I can't give you exactly what I would put in there, but think. And in terms of what we talked about at the beginning, which is understanding where your life and your experience are and maybe where there's a little bit of overlap, that should inform the alerts that you put up as well. And follow the same hashtags on Twitter.
Okay. I guess you help people from all walks of life, but to different industries and things like that. So one thing that the HR industry might face would be that it's not as interesting as a new yoga studio or an amazing new nutrition thing or finance tip, it may be seen as a dry topic. So how do you find interesting hooks and angles for what can be a dry industry?
Yeah. Well, so you're probably not going to get on the Today Show or the BBC unless there is something that's very, very business focused that is applicable to a broad business audience. So, for example, here in the States, we have Fox Business and we have CNBC, which are very business focused networks. So actually an HR story might be applicable to that audience. But when you're thinking about what outlet is more likely to pick up a story about, let's say, HR, it is likely going to be, it could be a Wall Street Journal, one of the newspapers, it could be Forbes, it could be Entrepreneur, it could be Inc. And finding an interesting angle is really just about the framing that you put around this particular story. So if you own a business that does HR consulting, you're writing something that is going to apply to somebody that is potentially hiring you. And it might be along the lines of 5 big mistakes that companies make when they're, I don't know, hiring HR personnel, or when they're, that's not very sexy, but
yes.
If you're thinking about numbers and something that's very juicy and grabby, something that is somebody's going to see, oh, this applies to me and I want to know if I'm making these mistakes. And I will say this, we all have a negativity bias. The media is always getting a bad rap for talking about things in the negative, but that's because our brains are constantly scanning the horizon for danger. So that's why those sorts of headlines grab us more than 5 things that you should celebrate about your business. Those don't grab us because we're not interested in that. It doesn't sound dangerous. So it is a little bit of psychology that goes into understanding how to pitch, but we do have a negativity bias. And that's why when we scan those things, 5 mistakes top HR firms are making, or 5 mistakes HR consultants are, that are costing you money. Things like that are the way that you find those angles and hooks. So think about it. If you're on LinkedIn and you put content up there, you hear people talk a lot about the hook. It's how you get people to read past the first 2 lines of your post. It's exactly the same. It's putting a very juicy hook in the subject line and then diving right into the pitch.
Really good advice. Yeah, I've heard of good news podcasts, good news newspapers, news shows and stuff where they focus on the positive aspects and they kind of die away after a while because where's the drama? We need the drama.
The funny thing is people constantly complain about the negativity of news, but when they do try, and I used to work in the industry, was there for 20 years. When we try positive stories, they just don't get the same traction. People like them because they make them feel warm and safe, but that's not necessarily why we're looking at the news. We want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, our business, our family, our health, whatever the case may be.
Makes sense. And in terms of the outreach then, email or a tweet, what is the best method for sending a pitch that says, 5 big mistakes about hiring XYZ?
Email, 100%. Don't do it via Twitter. Don't do it social media. Email is the best way to do it. But what I'm trying to say here is don't send out an email at 5 p.m. on a Friday. Try and send out your emails when you know journalists are going to be in their chairs. So generally speaking, most, whether it's digital, whether it's TV, whether it's radio, most news outlets have a morning editorial meeting where they decide what they're going to be covering in the show that day. That's usually around 9 a.m. Eastern, right, through 10 a.m. They have another editorial meeting in the afternoon. That's around, generally speaking, anywhere from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And so journalists are going to be in their chairs, likely before those meetings, deciding what stories they're going to be pitching their management. The assignment editors are going to be running through the pitches that they have in their inbox, seeing what would make a good story for that day, aside from the breaking news stories. So try and pitch when you know a journalist is going to be in their seat, even if the story is not for that day. And you shouldn't be pitching day of unless it's a story that is outbound PR, meaning you are reacting to something going on in the news. For example, here in the States, I guess it was about a year ago, there was a bank collapse, Silicon Valley Bank. So we started pitching a lot of our financial experts in outbound PR as a result of that story, which means we were pitching day of in order for it to be timely. Generally speaking, if you're pitching an evergreen story or you're pitching in anticipation of an event, you're pitching about 5 weeks ahead of time-ish. There's not a hard rule around that, but 5 weeks is a good rule of thumb when you're pitching ahead of time. So you're doing an email. You're not putting an attachment. The pitch doesn't come in a separate PDF or a separate document. The email itself is the pitch. It's got a juicy subject line. It's got a hook right at the top. It's a paragraph, not a long one. It's about 2 to 3 sentences where you're telling them why this particular topic is important to their audience. You're jumping into a quick bio of yourself. You can give a brief synopsis of the 5 tips or whatever. And then I like to, at the bottom, I don't often have journalists take me up on this, but I like to give them the opportunity to make this pitch a sort of a one-stop shop. And so I add suggested questions onto the bottom, especially if it's a television interview and it's going to be a live interview. Here are 5 questions that, I'm prepared to answer. Doesn't mean that's what they're going to ask me. But if they have a busy day and the anchor or the host doesn't have time to do a lot of research, or the producer doesn't have time to do a lot of research, I've just given them questions that I know I can answer. So I like to add that in there. Not everybody does that. And then a link, if you have any links to, if it's a TV interview and you have any links to videos that you've been on or other media appearances, that's good to put in there. Not a long one, like 30 seconds-ish. A YouTube link is fine. This is a requirement if you're looking for national television. National TV will not pick you up unless you can demonstrate that you understand how to handle a camera and you can speak compellingly to one. Local TV is a different story. They're looking for people in their local communities, and they're not going to have as much media opportunity. They're not going to have as much media appearances. So that is not a requirement for a local television program.
Got it. And it just occurred to me, we've been talking about pitching and sending a pitch, but just to define a pitch is, here's an idea for a story. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. Here's an idea for a story. Here's why it's important to your audience. And here's why I should talk about it. Basically, your pitch is answering 3 questions, right? So why is this important? Why now? Why do we want to talk about it now? And why you? Why are you the one that should be talking to us about this?
Sounds like a good sales pitch anyway. But the automated services like these PR Newswire type things where you upload a press release that goes out to lots of different places. What are your thoughts on those things?
For a large organization who already has name recognition, they're great because their niche publications and television programs will pick them up. For a small business owner who doesn't have a name yet, very unlikely that they'll be picked up because nobody knows who you are. If you're a large organization, absolutely. And I mean, there's nothing to say that you can't upload a press release to the automated news wires and sort of cross your fingers that somebody might take a specific interest in something that you're doing. But chances are no, unless you're a big name, that's what they're scanning for. What are the big stories that are appropriate for our audience that are names that we already know?
Now, we've been talking about on-camera interviews and media appearances and so on. So you help people with on-camera virtual communication. Could you share some advice in this area? Because it's maybe tricky for some people to go on camera and then act naturally.
So it is tricky. I know that it's tricky because I was really bad at it when I first started. Terrible and terrified, I like to say. But I know that if I can do it, anybody else can do it. The key is having enough energy. That's really where most people go wrong. They don't recognize that they are there to sort of energetically support the host, right? And especially if this is a television interview. If you're doing an interview, via phone or via Zoom, the phone, the energy doesn't matter quite as much unless they're going to be actually using sound bites from your phone interview in, let's say, a radio show. Then you want your voice to make sure that you are showcasing the energy and the passion. It really becomes about using your voice effectively. When you're in front of the lens, it's about using your voice and also your body language and your facial expressions and all of that other stuff. So no matter where you are outside of an email interview, it is about energetically supporting the host. And that is about having enough energy, but also looking natural. If you can combine those 2 things, you are golden. Much easier said than done. So where I like to start people is recognize that when you are in a studio, it's usually easier for most people outside of the fact studio is sort of a unnatural environment. It's much easier for people to have a conversation with a person who's sitting across a desk or on a couch than it is for most of us to have a compelling conversation through a little dot on our computer screen. So eye contact is huge, and energy. And this is sort of how I describe the way to judge your energy on camera. If you think about going to a noisy restaurant and you are with a table of, let's say 7 others. So there's 8 of you there and you're seated at one side and the person you're wanting to talk to is at the other side of the table down at the other end. What are the things that you do in order to make sure that that person can understand you around and through all of the noise? You probably lean forward when something is exciting. You look them in the eye. You use variety in your voice. Maybe you project certain things. You use maybe hand expressions. Oh my gosh, I can't believe these 3 things happened today. Number 1, I did this. Number 2, this happened. And number 3, this happened. When you think about how you'd communicate in that environment to make sure that that person understood what you were saying, conceptually, it's exactly the same when you're on TV. For most people, and this sounds very specific, it's about a 25% increase in energy. And the way that you can practice it is just to open up your phone and riff into your phone for 30 seconds. And each time, amp up the energy till you feel like a crazy person. And then go back and watch it. And you will see, usually, for most people, 99% of people, the energy that they actually delivered with is much different than the energy they thought they delivered. And so, again, it's usually people are much more muted than they need to be. And there's a lot of psychology that goes into that, which I'm happy to talk about if you want. But for most people, it requires a significant bump in energy.
Right. So head towards the crazy end of the scale.
Head towards crazy town.
Okay. Yeah, that's excellent advice. And I guess there's nothing scarier for most people than is to record themselves and see them talking back. So how do you help people get over these sort of challenges?
Well, when I'm working with somebody in my program that's all about, PR pitching and media training, we go through a 3-month program where we focus on, learning how to pitch, what your stories are, how to craft a pitch, how to make the connections, which we sort of skirted around today a little bit superficially. But then 4 sessions of my program is devoted to media training. So we'll do mock interviews. We'll create a system for delivering your sound bites and your talking points so that you always know what you're going to say, regardless of what you're asked. And then we dive into understanding how to do all of those things effectively through a camera. Are we actually going into a studio? No, we're not, but we are working virtually, and I can get a very good read on your energy that you will deliver within a studio, the way that you deliver via Zoom or WebEx or whatever it is that you're on. So we do an extensive media training session as well. And we walk through mindset, we walk through vocal variety, we walk through physical performance. Those are the elements that go into creating an effective and engaging on-camera persona. And then once you have the skills, then you're able to build on them through the practice.
Sounds very good. It's funny, I think back to the Olympics, and with the Olympics, you watch all kinds of random sports that you don't normally watch. And so you're exposed to different expert commentators who you've never listened to before. And some jump out at you more than others. The ones who are animated and a little bit crazy, they were great. They added their color. And then other ones who are so smart and stuff, but they just sit there deadpan. It's a bit harder to listen to. So when you think about it in terms of energy, it does make a huge impact. Yeah.
TV is all about energetically supporting the host, especially. They're all about that, but TV is the one where it really comes through. And if you're a host or a reporter and you've had a guest who getting anything out of was like pulling teeth, you know that it is incredibly challenging to make that segment compelling for the audience. If somebody doesn't sound like they're into what they're talking about and they're excited to be there, I mean, listen, we all expect TV and our stories to they churn. And so when all of a sudden a segment comes to a screeching halt because a guest looks like they're about to fall asleep, you're putting much more work on the anchor of the host. You may get that initial opportunity, but I guarantee they're never going to invite you back because you've made their job harder.
Yeah, game over. Excellent. Well, Kerry, you've shared so much good advice, tips, and so on. So thank you very much for that. If people want to learn more about you, get in touch, maybe work with you or refer you to others, what should they do next?
Well, the easiest thing is to find me on LinkedIn. It's under Kerry Barrett, and you'll find all my contact information. You can schedule a free strategy call there. The other place to go is my website, specifically to the resources page. So it's kerrybarrett.com/resources. And on that page, there are a bunch of free resources and tools to help you get started understanding how to pitch, understanding how to communicate effectively on camera, and a whole bunch more.
Excellent. So go check that out. And if you're listening to this on the go, we'll have all that in the show notes so you can find that. But otherwise, Kerry, thank you very much again. I've really enjoyed our chat today.
Oh, my pleasure as well, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on A Better HR Business, the podcast that explores the world of HR consulting and HR tech businesses. For show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Remember to subscribe and share the show with any friends who are busy growing a HR business. Thanks, and see you next time.